Hello financiers, welcome to the 5th day of the Global Education Week. Today we are going to be discussing all things audit. We will get to go through the audit checklist as highlighted in the finance standards and then get to understand the procedures that will aid us in implementing the audit successfully in our entities. And then we'll be able to also go through a brief summary of how best we can follow through with the key action items. I do hope you enjoy. I will be your FASI for today. My name is Meryl. I am from AIESEC in Kenya and I'm currently serving as the financial advisor for the MEA region. Let's just get into it. So on your screen right now we have the session objectives for today's session. We will begin by defining what auditing means in the broader sense and then scale it down to the context of AIESEC specific to our own checklists as an organization. Then we'll proceed to the audit process, which will be a step-by-step guide to successfully implementing the checklist in your entities, including the LCs. Then we'll briefly go through the current status of auditing in our various regions just to understand what the reality is on the ground, and then we'll end with a summary with the key takeaways from the session. You will also have the opportunity to share some of your questions or comments based on your experience in implementing the checklist in the past and what you think should be included moving forward. So what is auditing? So this can be defined as the systematic examination of financial records and other relevant documents to determine the accuracy and compliance. So these are two key things that we tend to look at when you are conducting an examination, or rather you're conducting an audit. So you have to ensure that the statements presented to you are actually accurate and are compliant to either the accounting and financial reporting standards, the regulations, and the laws that govern the territories in which you operate as an entity, because each government has different sets of laws that govern societies and organizations that operate within their lands. We will then look at the types of audits. So specific to this session, we will focus on these three, but you should note that there are up to 14 types of audits, but we won't focus on those. We will only focus on the three main ones that affect us as an organization or are applicable to AIESEC. So we'll look at the external audit, which is an independent examination that is conducted by an external person. This is usually an independent contractor or a firm that you bring into the organization to evaluate you. Then for the internal and in legal and financial audit, we will be basically going through what somebody in the organization is ideally supposed to look at when they are examining our financial processes and practices. So the financial audit will tend to look at the finance standards and the financial statements and records of the organization, but the legal audit will look at the legal practices of the organization and anything that should be in line with the laws of the country in which the entity is based. So after conducting the audits, the auditor usually has some results, and the results will form the opinion the auditor makes of the evaluation. So the auditor's opinion is defined as a written statement describing an auditor's independent evaluation of an organization's financial statements and practices. So this is what the auditor determines as the final opinion based on the results of the entire audit process. The audit opinions should also in itself be an examination of the accuracy and completeness of the financial statements and practices. There are four main types of auditor's opinions, and we have the unqualified audit, the qualified audit, an adverse opinion, and then we have the disclaimer opinion. The unqualified audit opinion states that the financial statements or organization's practices are actually a true and fair representation of how the organization operates based on the regulations, laws, and accounting principles. The unqualified audit tends to be in line with the conformity of the entity to the accounting principles. When you look at the qualified audit, the auditor opts not to give an unqualified opinion or an adverse opinion, but they will have a concern with specific parts of the financial statements and practices. So it means that you may be following the regulations, but there are specific parts that are not completely in line and don't actually give a true representation of the organization's practices. The adverse opinion is in fact the worst case scenario of the outcome of an audit. This means that the evaluation has determined that the financial statements and practices do not fairly represent the entity's accounts or do not comply with the regulations, or both. So in this case, they are completely outside of the context of where they operate. They are not in line with the accounting principles, and they are in fact not true and fair. Then lastly, we have the disclaimer opinion, which states that the auditor has opted not to give any opinion whatsoever. This may be due to reasons such as maybe they were not given enough information to accurately do the evaluation, or perhaps some of the opinions given were not actually independent. So maybe you might have that some of the members within the organization made it difficult for the auditor to actually implement his evaluation or her evaluation in the most accurate way possible. So in order for us to understand the auditor's opinions more clearly, we have this table that gives us the differences between each and every single one of the opinions. So we have the unqualified audit, which states that the statements represent the entity's financial accounts fairly and truthfully, and they indeed conform to all the accounting principles. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll be focusing on the matching principle and the conservatism principle to further explain how the auditor can determine the accounting principles. So the qualified audit means that the auditor is not entirely confident with calling it unqualified or adverse. For example, it means that maybe a section of the financial accounts was not entirely true or did not entirely conform to the accounting principles. For example, an expense being recorded after writing the gross profit line. Usually you're supposed to have the total income, then you record your expenses, and then you find out what is the total expenses. You will subtract the expenses from the income to get the gross profit, and if you represent an expense after the gross profit, this will be an inaccurate application of accounting standards. Then we have the adverse opinion, which I repeat is the worst case scenario. This states that the financial records do not fairly represent the entity's accounts and do not conform to accepted accounting principles. Lastly, we have the disclaimer. As I previously explained, it means that the auditor has determined that they cannot actually make a specific opinion, so they opt not to say something. This is usually because the accounts don't seem to violate accounting principles, but they are unable to accurately give an opinion because maybe they didn't get enough information. So when you're conducting an audit, or when you engage a contractor, an external auditor, you need to make sure you have enough information to give them in order for them to effectively and efficiently deliver. We proceed to auditing in the context of AIESEC, which focuses on the checklist that we go through in the finance standards. So we will begin with the three main types of auditings that we will be doing, and these ones will be the best case scenario for us as entities. We'll focus on getting an unqualified external audit, which is the best case scenario. Then we'll also look at the checklist for the financial audit, and we'll lastly look at the legal internal audit. So the audit scope. So in AIESEC, we'll have two main parts of the audit. We'll have the internal audit and the external audit. The internal auditing is a function that, although operating independently from other departments in the organization, it resides within the organization. It is responsible for performing auditing within a wide range of areas in AIESEC. For example, we are going to look at financial internal auditing and legal internal auditing. Those are two different areas of auditing. Then we also look at external auditing. So this is an independent examination of the financial statements prepared by the organization. It is usually conducted for statutory purposes. For example, in different countries, organizations are required to consistently produce accounts of their financial operations, and this is usually required to be done by an entity that is outside of the organization in order for them to continue functioning within that territory. So when you are looking at the external audit, what are the main things that we need to focus on? We'll need to make sure that we have stored all the documents from at least the past 5 years, and they are ready for the auditor to actually go through them and give an accurate account. And then we'll have to have a licensed external auditor. When you're engaging an external auditor, please make sure that you have actually signed a contract or signed an engagement letter to make sure that this person has actually been engaged by the organization and it can be proven. And we will also look at the unqualified auditor's report. This is crucial for you to maintain operation within your entity as well as operation in AIESEC as an organization. Then remember that this must be done every single year, and it has to be done once a year. So it is necessary that this is done. Just to emphasize, the external audit has to be done because it verifies the annual accounts and they provide a true and fair picture of the organization finances. So also having a an unqualified external audit, is part of global membership criteria. This means that you cannot retain membership in the organization if you do not produce unqualified external audits. Just to repeat, having an unqualified external audit is part of global membership criteria. So this is the best case scenario, and this is what you should have. So now we'll proceed to what you will be doing on a day-to-day basis as an entity. So the internal audit, in AIESEC, it will focus on the legal audit and the financial audit. So the legal audit is to examine if the entity is acting according to the national laws and according to the regulations that have been stated from AIESEC International or the national compendium. So you have to always strictly follow your compendium in order to ensure that you're actually adhering to the set guidelines. Then the financial audit is to verify if the entity is following financial procedures in order to guarantee good financial practices, which is very key within the organization and according to national and international principles. We are an entity that operates in an external environment, despite the fact that we have our own principles, it is also important that we adhere to national and international principles so that we are actually fully compliant. Now we go to the importance of internal auditing. Internal auditing serves as a catalyst for effectiveness and efficiency. So it means that it can actually drive effectiveness and efficiency in the entity. So it goes a long way in giving us insights for analysis, assessment of data and the processes in the organization. So this results in us being able to have internal controls. How are we able to make sure that we are monitoring and effectively monitoring how our finances and legal operations are in the entity, and actually put checks and balances where need be. Then we look at risk management. If you are able to audit, you are able to identify key areas that need improvement or may result in certain risks for the organization, and you can actually predict them and come up with ways to mitigate those risks. Then we have corporate governance. Now this is basically letting us know that audits can actually inform some of the decisions we make at the MC level and also at the LC level, so that we are always making informed decisions and using data to determine how we function as an organization. We will proceed to the internal legal audit checklist. Now this is the checklist based on the legality in the organization. So first of all, in order for you to say that you have accurately examined an organization's legal operations in accordance to the national laws and AIESEC international guidelines, you will have to go through the following checklist. So, do you have a standardized exchange, members, and partnership contracts to ensure that all of them are in line? So it means at NC level and all the LCs within your organization, every single one of those entities should have standardized contracts, and they should all be the same, because if you have a difference in entities, you will tend to have some loopholes in terms of compliance to the legal and international guidelines. Then we will look at the valid visas for international MCs and EPs. So this is to make sure that we are in line with the national laws. Every country requires that members are either validly in the country, which is shown by the visa, or if they are from different countries, they can actually be identified by their immigration services. So that is why you need the valid visas. Then we proceed to insurance, which is a key factor in protecting our exchange participants as well as international MC members in terms of health, and which is why it's a part of our risk management. Insurance actually helps with maybe if somebody gets into legal trouble while in the country, they can actually afford to obtain legal services. So it is very crucial that they have insurance. Then we proceed to the registration of the entity. Now this means that you are actually recognized by the government of your country. So you must be legally registered in your country, and the legal registration must be for both MC as a separate legal entity, and then for the LCs, they must be recognized as organizations affiliated to the MC or to the university, whichever suits you. For some entities, the LCs are not actually affiliated to the MC, they are part of their university, so you might have to take a look at what suits your entity. Then we look at the work permits. Do all of the EPs actually produce valid work permits for the period of time that they want to work? And this goes to also the MC members in your entity. Are they actually able to produce documentation that they are legally in the country and they are actually allowed to work in the country and operate on behalf of AIESEC? This is very key, because this can actually bring problems with the authorities and get EPs or international MC members deported. So it is very crucial that they get the work permits combined with the valid work visa, with the valid visas. Sorry. Then we go to the updated compendiums. So it is very important that you consistently update your compendiums in accordance to the realities that you face in your entity. And then you must have regular legislative meetings and produce minutes to actually state that those meetings were held and they updated the compendiums. These are really crucial. They will actually help in engaging all of the stakeholders, which are the entities and the members in those entities, to adhere to the compendium guidelines, as well as participate in updating those compendiums. Then lastly, you should comply to the membership criteria that is highlighted in the MSc. Secondly, we will look at the internal financial audit checklist. Now, this checklist is a verification of the financial procedures within the organization. So it's strictly following the finance checklist. So with regard to the finance checklist, we will look at the pricing. Is the pricing actually being done in line with the customer flow? When are the EPs actually paying their fee to participate in our projects? Then next we'll look at the budget, income statements, balance sheets, cash flow statements, and bank statements. These all must be produced, and they all must be in line with the accounting principles, and they all must follow the template that has been given by the Global Finance Board to ensure that all the entities are in fact operating with standardized statements. Usually some entities don't operate with standardized statements, and it becomes difficult to actually determine how much they're earning, how much they're bringing in, and actually make informed decisions. And the bank statements actually serve to complement the income statements, balance sheets, and cash flow statements prepared by the finance team. Then next we have financial proofs. Now it is crucial that we are constantly storing all of our financial records from the beginning of our term all the way to the end, and produce them every time an internal audit is scheduled to take place. This is really important because it serves to also complement the statements and the income statements and the cash flow statements, and to actually prove that these statements in fact occurred. Then we have the product income and costs. This ideally should be highlighted in the income statements. You should be able to determine how much you actually earn from your products and how much it costs you to actually run the products. Then you must have sponsorship contracts. Sponsorship contracts usually show us how much we are receiving from external partners, and it's important in actually reinforcing what has been highlighted in the income statements. Then we go to the conference revenues and costs, which are usually put separate from the main budget for the entity. So you should also be able to determine how much you earn from conferences and how much they cost you for sustainability purposes. You know, when you're able to actually see what you're earning and what you are using up, you're able to make cost-effective decisions. Then lastly, you're supposed to look at whether your entity is taxed and if you're actually paying your taxes. This is really, really important. Some entities are lucky enough to have laws in their country that allow them to operate without necessarily being taxed. So you have to look with your government agency to find out whether you're taxed. So you need to find this out. And also with regard to reimbursements is the money given back to members after they have conducted operations on behalf of the organization. So you also have to have records of this. So we'll ask ourselves, how do you actually implement the checklist? We have gone through everything that is highlighted in the checklist, and now we understand what the checklist is. So now we will see how best can I implement the checklist. So this is a step-by-step procedure of the checklist, of how to best implement the checklist. So how fast should you prepare? You should firstly recruit and train your internal auditor based on the needs of your entity. Then you must check that you have all documents from your legislative meetings. These include the updated compendium and also minutes that state that this legislative meeting in fact occurred, and this should also be filed and properly stored in the office. Then you should prepare all accounting documents from invoices to all the bank statements. They should ideally be properly restored from at least the past 5 years to ensure that the auditor can actually be able to see past trends in finances of the entity and actually give proper recommendations. Then we proceed to actually evaluate the bookkeeping software. Most entities actually use Wave, so whatever suits your entities, make sure that you are able to actually record all of the transactions to actually complement the invoices and receipts that you have. Then you check your petty cash book, and then you must ensure that your LCP or MCP is present. Then you check your receivables and liabilities, and then now you will prepare the questions. So all of these things will form part of the criteria for the audit, then that will form the basis of your questions. So we'll look at the auditing process. The auditing process involves 8 main steps that are recommended. So we'll begin with the planning step. Then we'll proceed to the opening meeting that actually determines what you have planned for in the audit. You'll proceed to data collection, then communication channels, report drafting, closing meeting, and then report distribution to the stakeholders, and lastly, follow up on the recommendations. So when you look at planning, what ideally should you determine? So at the beginning of your term, you should focus on the timelines and the areas which should be audited. You will be given a GFB tool which is coming soon. This is not yet ready now, but it should be what you use when you're planning for your audit. Then you should schedule an opening meeting at the beginning of the audit. So this opening meeting will be the basis of discussing what exactly you should focus on in your audit. In the opening meeting, you will discuss the plan and maybe give recommendations. Ideally, you should be able to have you there, your LCP, and your finance team member. It can also be NST finance or any other person you feel is necessary or is qualified enough to actually be present and make an informed opinion on what should be the scope of the auditing process. Next, we will have the data collection phase. So this is collection of all the information that are necessary to actually do an informed audit and do an accurate audit. Then you will also review all the manuals and test all the processes and policies and laws and regulations that are determining how your organization functions. Then we'll proceed to the communication. So this can take more than a day based on the amount of operations in the LC. So this will just be information that is being distributed to members in the organization so that they in fact know that an audit is actually being conducted. Then we'll proceed to the report drafting. This will be based on this template that we have given. Ideally, after you have collected information, you should be able to record so that you are able to present something tangible to the stakeholders of the organization. So you'll begin with the introduction. You'll basically give the scope of the audit and what type of audit it is and why it is, what type of audit it is. Then we'll look at the purpose, which is why you are conducting the auditing and what methods are you going to use. These methods will include the data collection methods that you'll use. Some may opt to use questionnaires. Some will do content evaluation, which is looking at existing documents to see what is actually the reality on the ground. Then we'll proceed to the statement of auditing standards. So this is the criteria that you evaluate. This criteria is actually derived from the checklist that we have previously discussed. So the criteria for auditing should always be in line with the finance standards checklist. Then now this is the executive summary. This is where the auditor is able to give the opinion. So the executive summary will have the statements, the financial statements based on what the auditor has evaluated. So you will also include all those results in the report and give the recommendations for the entity moving forward. Next, after you have drafted your report, you will have the closing meeting to discuss it properly and actually review that everything went well and it's actually a true representation, and that the final opinion given by the auditors will in fact be accurate and complete. Then we will proceed to report distribution. So all of your stakeholders have a right to actually see what is happening. This may include the board of directors or advisors, depending on what you call it in your entity, and as well as the external auditors. And you may also want to make sure that if you have done an audit at MC level, perhaps your LCs through the finance subcommittee in your entity are able to actually see the reality of the entity as a whole. Then we'll do the last thing, which is follow-up. So this is to check if the action steps from the report were actually implemented. This is very crucial so that we ensure that we are actually moving forward as an entity whenever we record some weaknesses that we have, and we actually implement the recommendations so that we are moving forward. So now we'll actually review the current status of the auditing standard so that you get a brief overview of the reality in our entities and our regions. So the current status is auditing is in fact one of the lower performing standards in the entity, with Europe being the highest performing entity in implementing of the auditing standard. This means that they are trying really hard to make sure that they have implemented the checklist and they're actually conducting audits regularly and they're following through with recommendations. We'll have Americas at 72.20%, which is the second region. Then we have MEA being the third region with 68.36%, and then Asia Pacific region with 67.42%. So these are the current statistics in terms of implementation of the auditing standards in our entities. So what does this mean for us? Moving forward, it is really crucial that we focus on preparing ourselves very early. So when you're doing transition, or before even you begin your term, if you've not had the chance to have transition, it is very crucial to include auditing in your finance, legalities and administration year plan. This will help in making sure that you know when you will be doing your internal audit for legalities, when you'll do your internal audit for finances, and then when you'll do your external audit. So if you don't plan for something, you actually plan to fail. Then we have all records being collected. So you need to make sure you have created a proper framework that will be implemented across the board with all the entities in your AIESEC entity. So if you have LCs, you must make sure all of them are following the same collection method, the same storage method, and the same submission method for the documents that are necessary, which include receipts, invoices, income, and bank statements. For example, for all entities in the AIESEC network, we have the GFB survey, which is very crucial in helping us to see the reality on the ground. So you might want to make sure that when you're collecting the financial records, you have a clear and standardized framework. Then for the next part, we will need to make sure we have proper planning and scheduling of the auditing. So you must make sure that you have followed all the procedures, and assigned responsibles. It is very, very important that you have timelines included in your planning and deadlines for submission of documents, deadlines for data collection, deadlines for report submission, so that stakeholders are also able to be engaged early enough. And after they are engaged early enough, they are able to actually implement the results of the audit. The recommendations of the audit will actually be implemented very early, and we will be able to have a sustainable and accountable network very early. Remember, auditing will actually help in facilitating the AIESEC visa. So if you are able to audit and you're producing true and account statements, we will be in line with national laws, and being in line with national laws pushes us closer to the dream of having an AIESEC visa. Then we will have number 4, which is the external audit should be done once per year. This applies for both the LCs and the MC. You can just do it once per year. Then we have the internal audit should be done once for the MC and at least twice for LCs per year. So that for the LCs, you can assign someone from the NST to do it for them twice per year in the first part of the year, first 6 months, and then you do it after the next 6 months when they are finishing their term. Then lastly, audit reports must be shared with all stakeholders. I cannot emphasize the importance of this, because this means that all stakeholders will have enough information to act, especially LCs. At local level, LCs will be able to understand the realities of MCs and make adjustments early to in fact support the MC, and then overall support the AIESEC International Network towards its dreams and goals. Thank you for now. Feel free to contact me for any information and questions, and if you want to schedule consultancies, please feel free to do so. Now I will welcome any questions from the plenary. Kindly see the link in the description box below. Just send in your questions and I'll be able to answer them accordingly. Thank you.